Good morning and welcome to UCEA YouTube Live. This is Angel Nash, graduate research assistant and doctoral student at UCEA headquarters at the University of Virginia. I'm here today to interview Dr. Edward J. Fuller as part of his candidacy for the UCEA Executive Committee. Today, listeners will be hearing from Dr. Edward J. Fuller, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at Pennsylvania State University. His current research interests focus on educator quality, distribution, mobility, turnover, and career pathways, educator preparation, school improvement, evaluation, and charter schools. Welcome, Dr. Fuller.
Welcome to you, Angel.
Thank you. Let's begin with the first question. Please tell us about your background and your work as it relates to UCEA's mission and goals.
Okay, I will start at the beginning of my education career because I think that's important. I was a high school teacher in a diverse rural school just outside of Austin. I taught high school math. After doing that for a few years, I went to the University of Texas at Austin Principal Preparation Program with the intention of becoming a principal. I completed that degree and completed an internship as a principal in an urban school in Austin. And during that time, I had a chance to work with some faculty members on some publications and research, and I became more interested in that than being a principal. So I went to grad school at UT Austin in the education policy program and graduated in 2001 with a degree in educational administration. After that, I became director of research at the Texas Education Agency in the certification division. And so that's where I really started to focus on career pathways of teachers and leaders. After that, I worked at UT Austin as a special research associate. And at that time, I was also, that's when UCEA was located at UT Austin. And so I worked as the associate director of UCEA from 2007 to 2011. I also worked a lot with the Texas legislature, so I have extensive experience in the policy world and worked with a variety of different organizations, all of which were connected to teachers and leaders. After that, I moved to Pennsylvania State University, where I became an associate professor. And shortly after arriving at Penn State, I became the plenum representative for Penn State to UCEA. And in 2012, I was selected to be the associate director for policy and advocacy for UCEA, and I still currently serve in that position.
Thank you. You have served for several years as a plenary session representative. Tell us about your engagement in UCEA's governance.
So I've been fortunate through my involvement as a plenum representative and as an associate director 2 different times. In that I've been asked to help plan some of the plenum sessions. I've attended EC meetings, both when I was at UT Austin and in my current position as associate director for UCEA. And so I have some extensive experience and knowledge of how the EC works and how the leadership of UCEA interacts with the EC and the rest of UCEA. I've also, in addition to planning some of the aspects of the plenum meetings, I've helped set the agenda of UCEA regarding policy and advocacy. For example, I helped develop and implement the Day on the Hill activities in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. I've helped with some aspects of planning and implementing the UCEA convention, and I've also helped UCEA leadership in terms of developing policies and positions regarding the evaluation of principals and the evaluation of principal preparation programs.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. In what other ways have you engaged in UCEA?
A few additional ways. I've been going to the conference regularly and participating broadly in the conference since 2002. And then prior to that, I had a short stint where I didn't attend UCA because of the position I was in, but attended from 94 to 97. And then about 2003 onward. So certainly participated in that way. I'm also have numerous publications in JRLE and EAQ, two of the three UCA publications. I've written for a variety of UCA publications, the newsletter and the connections. I've written policy briefs for UCA, and I'm also an editorial board member for JRLE. And finally, and also importantly, been a reviewer and involved in the administration of the Jackson Scholars, the Clark Scholars, and a variety of other different like sub-organization efforts at UCEA.
Thank you. Discuss with us your scholarship, research projects, teaching, and/or service that can inform the work of UCEA, particularly the work of the Executive Committee.
So this is what's most exciting to me, because when I, especially when I was at UT Austin while UCA was there, and then when I came to Penn State, I discussed with UCA leaders, including members of the EC, about the type of research that we needed for UCA in the broader field of educational leadership, and so a lot of the work I've done directly connects to the core mission and vision of UCA. So I'll talk about the specifics of that in a second, but before I do that, I want to talk about the methods that I use, because I think that's important as well. Most of my research is quantitative in nature. I use two approaches. One is critical quantitative inquiry, and that's where I create new knowledge about leaders and educators. In particular, I focused on leaders and educators of color, women leaders, and then how students of color, students living in poverty, and other students experience leadership, and the degree to which they have access to experienced and well-prepared leaders. I also use a culturally responsive evaluation approach. And using that approach, I examine the economic, political, and cultural context of evaluation and accountability efforts to identify the barriers to fair and equitable opportunities and outcomes. So using the first approach, the critical quantitative inquiry approach, I've focused a lot on placement and turnover. So I have research publications, some of which are in EAQ or JRLE, about the placement of graduates of leadership preparation programs. And one of the things we found is that educators of color and women educators are less likely to get hired as principals. And that doesn't mean they weren't as qualified. And in fact, I think a good argument could be made that they were more qualified than white males who are more likely to get hired in that position. So we were able to identify some barriers to entry of people who would be very effective as leaders, but for whatever reason, and we don't really know the reasons yet, they weren't hired by districts and weren't placed in schools. And so that's a huge issue for the field and for UCA in particular, as we prepare a more diverse group of leaders and more women leaders. We need to figure out why they're not getting hired at the same rate as white males. I've also looked at turnover and in which type of schools leaders of color end up leading, and in the intersection there. And this actually intersects with some of the evaluation work as well. But So leaders of color, when they do get jobs to lead schools, tend to be placed in lower performing schools, at least as measured by state accountability systems, which tend to mismeasure school effectiveness. And then those accountability systems tend to conclude that those schools aren't very effective, although they make those conclusions based on pretty inaccurate and sometimes faulty information. And then that leads leaders of color to have higher attrition rates and higher turnover rates. In the schools that serve students of color and students of poverty tend to have higher turnover rates. And that's really important for a number of different reasons. One of which is that it impacts student achievement. It negatively impacts student achievement. Number two, it impacts other student outcomes like engagement and graduation, because oftentimes those are the students who need the most stability in terms of the adults in their lives, and the system we've created reduces or lessens the stability of leaders in those schools. In terms of culturally responsive evaluation, I've done quite a bit of work on evaluation of principals and evaluation of principal preparation programs. And again, this intersects with the critical quantitative inquiry. But with evaluation of principals, I have an EAQ article that shows that there's no statistical model currently available that allows us to accurately identify principal effectiveness. Yet many states have adopted such a measure, and that negatively impacts leaders in schools serving high proportions of students of color and students living in poverty. And so it increases the instability in those schools. In terms of evaluation of principal preparation program, I have a number of articles both in EAQ and JRLE and elsewhere that show that if states use really simplistic metrics for evaluating principal preparation programs, like value-added measures of their graduates or placement rates or attrition rates, it creates a huge disincentive for programs to recruit educators of color into their program. Because as I stated earlier, educators of color tend to take longer to be hired as principals, and they tend to get placed in schools with less resources and more challenging conditions. And they also leave at higher rates, partially because of poorly constructed accountability systems. So a lot of my work, in fact, almost all of my work, is really focused on principals and the preparation of principals, and in particular, how both leaders of color, women leaders, and then students of color and students living in poverty are connected with opportunities to have effective and experienced leaders. So that's really been my foci, and that anybody who's been in UCA for a long time and knows the mission and values of UCA knows that those are really tightly connected to the core mission and values of UCA.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. Can you share for us our last question, the reasons why you have chosen to run for the UCA Executive Committee and your vision for the future of UCEA?
Yes, this is an excellent question. So first, I'm a really strong supporter of the field of educational leadership, as evidenced with my long-term commitment with UCA and the scholarship that I just described. And UCA is, in my opinion, is a really critical organization that is a leader in the conversation about the importance of school leadership, and in particular, the preparation of school leaders. So helping UCA build upon its past successes and pushing that work forward is really important to me. Second, I have a really strong commitment to the goals and vision and ideals of UCA. That's why I've been involved with UCA so long and in so many different ways, and continue to be in I'd like to be involved even more through being a member of the EC. In terms of the vision, I want to help UCA continue to focus on raising awareness of the importance of educational leaders and the preparation of educational leaders, and work to enhance that work. One of my frustrations in the field is that I think outside of people who attend UCEA in Division A, there's a real lack of understanding about how important school leaders are and how important school leader preparation is. And so as part of the EC, I'd like to help push that forward to get a broader audience understanding the critical importance of school leaders and school leader preparation. And I want to continue and support and highlight the work that looks critically at how we prepare leaders and how we support school leaders, particularly in terms of leaders of color, women leaders, in the students and students in schools that have a high proportion of students of color, or students living in poverty, or ELL students, or students in special education. We need to look really long and hard about, do we prepare people well? Do we support people who go to lead those schools? In addition to that, I think helping UCA build upon past efforts to become more media savvy and to better promote the importance of our work. So build upon that and expand upon that. Again, my frustration is I don't think a lot of people outside of our field understand the critical nature of our field, and I think we can all do better as an organization to build that understanding outside of UCA. I'd also like to work to create systems that promote diverse voices from our field, diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, and sexual orientation, and disability status. All the diversity that UCA supports, and include the voice of practitioners as well, because sometimes I think we don't do that enough as a field. It's important to understand what they face on the ground and their experiences coming through leader preparation programs. And finally, I'd like to support research focused on really critical issues in our field and highlight that work. So work to support incentives and recognition structures for people who are taking on research projects that look at and inform the core issues of UCA, particularly how do we support school leaders, particularly those leading schools with high proportions of students of color and students living in poverty, and how do we better prepare people to take on those positions and stay in those positions.
Thank you for your time and thoughtful responses, Dr. Fuller. This interview will be archived on the UCEA YouTube channel. Listeners can access or share the interview at any time. We also encourage listeners to post comments and questions on this interview in the comments on the UCEA YouTube channel. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.